Bobo.
Yes, at that time I was on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, and they sent many people over to assist the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation in the location of Holly Bobo.
Okay, so tell us, just give us some general background information as to what are some of the tasks that you were asked to do regarding the investigation.
We followed numerous leads. We interviewed numerous individuals that were potential suspects on calls that we had gotten in, and we followed leads of that nature for quite some time, for several
and
weeks.
Did you, in fact, actually find some evidence in this case?
Yes, I did.
And what was that regarding? What evidence was that?
I found Holly's notebook.
And how did you come to find Holly's notebook?
I had looked at some initial cell phone information, and it looked like the termination was near the creek on Gooch Road.
When you say termination, what do you mean by
The
termination?
end of where the phone had traveled, where
Okay.
the phone had traveled. And I was thinking, I said the person might have thrown more items in that area. I learned that her lunchbox was found in the creek. It had the strap of it had hung on a stick that was sticking out of the culvert. It's a big four-foot culvert, corrugated culvert, and there was a stick sticking out, and the lunchbox strap had caught on that. And I thought there may be more large items, and I asked TBI if I could go look in that creek.
Okay.
Myself and Senior Inspector Tom Bach went down to that area, and within probably 20 minutes, I found her notebook. It was about 75 yards down the creek, around about two bends, and about three-quarters of the way up. It had, well, there had been a large rain, and it had washed up into kind of like the brush on the side of the creek. And I noticed it was hers because it was black and in the brush, and it had Holly on it. And I called, at that moment, I called TBI, didn't touch it, called TBI, and they came over and collected it.
Okay, and did the TBI, you mentioned that you'd done some preliminary cell phone work.
Yes.
Will you tell the jury, how is it that you came to do preliminary cell phone work?
During the first parts of the investigation, we know from her mother that her phone was with her. Her mother said it was probably in her back pocket. And John Mayer, he was the former supervisor, who's now retired with TBI, asked us if we could look at her cell records and map her phone.
Okay. And who was it that asked you to do that?
John Mayer.
And what was John Mayer's role in the TBI investigation?
He was the supervisor.
Okay. And supervisor, do you know who supervisor he was specifically?
Over Terry Dicus, over the investigation. I didn't really know Terry Dicus at that time.
Okay. And so, just, will you please give us some background? I know that the Marshal Service has some secrets about how they use cell phone, but give us some background, just as some of your general training with cellular telephones and what your experience is with them.
I've worked with cell phones for a number of years, and I understand how cell phone technology works, especially on this type of system. I can't really get into the details of that. So.
Okay. And your training, you've had your training all through the Marshal Service, is that right?
Cell phone usage since probably about 99.
Since 99?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's something you use on a very regular basis?
I used to. In the last few years, we do tracking data, but I was.
So, but in 2011.
I'm not authorized to answer that kind of
Okay,
question. So.
right. But in 2011, you were using cellular telephone on a regular basis, cellular telephone technology. Is that right?
Most of my experience was from 99 through about 2007.
Okay.
But it's the same kind of information. So.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble.
It's the same kind of information.
Okay. And the cellular telephone network that we were talking about, can you tell us what kind of level or generation in 2011 the Decatur area cellular telephone network was?
It's a 2G network.
It was a what?
2G network.
Okay. So 2G network.
Your Honor, if defense is going to try and use him as an expert cell phones, I think we need to hear that before, and we'd like to board ours if that's her intention.
Okay. Yes, I'd like to use him as a cell phone expert, Your Honor.
Board dear.
And what kind of training that specifically?
A little training back, we didn't really have an official course back when I started. It was more of like we would have classes from time to time that we'd learn.
That everybody would go to?
No,
Just you would go to?
I did this for the Eastern District of Texas for about 6 years.
Okay, so what training is specifically? and
Mostly
when-
on-job training.
I'm sorry?
Well, on-job training
Okay. And when was that?
from 99 to 2006.
99 to,
1999 to 2006.
you had on-the-job training?
Yes.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, have you ever been tendered as an expert and testified in court
No,
as a
I've not.
phone expert?
No.
The Marshal Service does an incredible job of finding people, and that's your, right? I mean, if you had to put a big umbrella, I know you do other things, but that's what you do, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm sure you're very good at your job, but you don't consider yourself to be an expert in phone analysis, do you?
That is a very complicated subject.
Sure.
It's much more complicated than a 2G subject.
Okay, and so my question is, that would be a yes. I mean, you're not used by the Marshal Service.
No,
as
I'm not.
expert in
No.
phone.
No.
And, Your Honor, based on that,
Well, I'd like a chance to forward on also. So, part of your job that they hired you to do, as part of what the Marshal Service does, is the Marshal Service is tasked with finding fugitives. Isn't that one of the things that the United States Marshal Service does?
Yes.
Okay. And in order to find fugitives, the United States Marshal Service uses numerous resources to hunt down people, don't they?
Yes, that is correct.
And these fugitives might be people that have escaped from prisons.
I don't see how this goes at all to his expertise,
It-
that's the issue.
Let her go.
People that have escaped from prison, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Or it might be people that are wanted on warrants to be arrested.
Correct.
And so at one point you were living in Eastern District of Texas, is that right?
Yes.
And there you were assigned to the fugitive unit. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I was the warrant coordinator for the district, and I ran the fugitive task force.
And so on a day-to-day basis, it was part of your job requirement to find people that were trying to hide.
Correct.
And one of the ways that you would do this on a regular basis.
and I object to the leading, she's doing a great job of it. but
I'm
she-
board diaring, Your
On board
Honor.
diary, you need to still ask an open-ended question.
So is the court going to rule on that?
You can,
So one of the ways that you would, do this, you had technical information that you would use to track people's cell phones. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the Marshal Service, how do they feel about letting out their technical secrets to the world as to how it is they track people on their cell phones?
I'm not allowed.
You're not allowed to tell that. But that was still part of what you did on a regular basis.
Correct.
Okay. And so you maintained that job for several years, right? Fugitive?
Yes, I was a warrant coordinator for about 6 years.
And were you good or bad at your job?
I was very good at my job.
Very good.
Yes.
Okay. And so, while you might not be an expert in setting up cellular telephone networks or how networks work, you were an expert in finding people using their phones, weren't you?
Yes.
Okay. And you had training in that area. You said on-the-job training. What does it mean to get on-the-job training?
You would work with somebody that's an electronic surveillance person.
Okay, and so what would they do to give you on-the-job training? Like, specifically, are they showing you how to use
Yes,
maps?
explain systems, how to read systems, how to understand the technology.
And then at some point you transferred to the Western District of Tennessee, is that right?
I actually work for the U.S. Tactical Operations Division. I actually work for headquarters. I don't work for Western Tennessee.
I just can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually work for the Tactical Operations Division for the U.S. Marshals. I do not work for the Western District of Tennessee.
Okay, so you don't work for, you work for their Tactical Operations Division?
Yes, I work for headquarters.
Okay, but you live in Western Tennessee?
I live in Western Tennessee.
Okay. And so, what is your job description as Tactical Operations?
I work for the Strategic National Stockpile Program and a liaison to the CDC, and I spent 9 years in the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Okay.
This is Center for Disease Control. So.
And so you even gave advice to the TBI agents in this case as to how to use the cellular phone and how to track.
That's correct.
And it's the TBI, and more specifically, John Mayer, you said, that asked you to come in and provide your expertise to help them track this cell phone. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
You didn't volunteer. They said, hey, listen, we want to send you some data and see what you can tell us back.
Correct.
Isn't that right?
Yes.
So,
That they gave us the cell tower dumps, as they call them. That's all the AT&T and Verizon cell information on Excel spreadsheets.
so that tells you, so what, one of the things they gave you when you say cell tower dumps, that means they take all the information, like where a tower is located, how strong the signal is, which direction the three little antennas are pointing. They gave you all that information. Is that right?
Correct.
And then they provided you with information about Holly Bobo's cellular telephone.
Are we still holding on?
Yes.
Expertise, Your Honor? I think we're talking about.
We are, because this is actually a state's witness, Your Honor. The state is the one that chose this person to come in.
called him.
No, but the state's the one that, in the investigation,
It makes no
chose him.
difference, okay?
Witnesses are witnesses, but when she's finished with her report, I have a few more very important, pointed questions about this.
Okay.
And so, based on all of your experience, you were able to come in and look at the cellular telephone information they gave you, weren't you?
I did that, but I also would ask questions to people in my agency, with the FBI also, and with AT&T, if I had any follow-up questions.
Okay.
In other words, Judge, she was asking questions of the experts.
I wanted to verify what I knew.
But are we still?
Your Honor, at this point,
I have some more questions.
Go.
Okay. Actually, the U.S. Marshal Service has a task force for phones, and you're not part of it. Never have been, have you?
I've never been a part of that group. I did that for the Eastern District of Texas during those years because we didn't have an electronic surveillance person.
The answer to my question is yes.
Yes, I'm not a part of the
Right.
of
And
the
we're not a
TOG.
part of that in 2011.
No, it was not.
In fact, the last on-the-job training that you had would have been in 2006, correct?
Correct.
And you have to agree with me, surely, that between 2006 and 2011, there were vast changes with cell phone technology.
This is a 2G network. There was no changes.
So you would not agree with me.
Oh, there's vast changes, absolutely, but not
Yeah.
not on these these towers.
And I appreciate you adding, because you want to testify as an expert today, don't you?
No, I just want to explain to you what I know.
Okay. So would you consider, do you call yourself an expert in phones?
No, I do not.
Okay. Judge,
well,
even he knows he's not an expert.
first of all,
You're
Your
offering
Honor,
him as an expert.
he doesn't even have to be an expert to
According
testify
to
what he did.
planning,
Okay, so he
Your
doesn't,
offer as an expert, he can testify
Fine.
generally as
As-
to what he did in this case,
Okay.
such as finding a notebook or whatever. But by his own admission, he is not a cellular phone expert.
he can testify, though, as to what he did in the investigation as far as looking at the phone data. That's something that he did. He's a fact witness. He doesn't have to give an opinion. He can just
He can
say,
explain what he
he
did
did.
in response to what he found.
and what he was asked to do by the TBI.
He will not be allowed to express an opinion.
Okay, no
I found
opinions.
He's not an expert in this area. He's certainly an expert in some areas, but not this area.
You know, it's ironic that the TBI called him in to do cell
Let's not
phones, and
argue
now,
in front of the jury, please. Okay?
Yes.
All right, ask you a question.
Okay. So at some point, did the TBI ask you to look at the cellular data information or phone records of Holly Bobo?
Yes, they did.
And did you look at that information?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And then at some point, did you work with Terry Dicus on that?
Yes, I did.
And together with other people, you developed a map, did you not, of Holly's cellular telephone?
Yes.
Judge,
All
this would be
right,
conclusions of
this
the
is
video.
outside his area. Let's go.
Well, Your Honor, at this point then, I'd like to make an offer
All
of
right, take the
proof.
jury out, please. We can be seated, so that we can be clear, anybody can say they followed the map, but he doesn't have the expertise to say that cell towers dictated that the phone was here, 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 or here. Okay?
I'm going to have him testify to that because that's what he did for the TBI. The TBI asked him to come in and
Do your offer.
give her
of proof.
opinion. So what is it what information did you start with when you were working for the TBI regarding the cellular
The overlay map that AT&T provided and the cell tower information off of the Excel spreadsheets. It showed terminating phone number, Holly's number, and the location, tower location. These are 4 numbered towers. The 5th number is the cell section of the 3 sections. These are 3 section towers in this area.
Okay. And so with that information then, what did you do next?
I plotted out on a map where these towers were, the cell sections with the overlay map, and a general idea of where her phone was at specific times in these cell sections. Because you can look on the Excel spreadsheet, it will tell you terminating number, her phone number, and AT&T can tell you which column to look in to the location.
Okay.
And you just follow that location and you plot out on a map and you plot out where her phone was at 8 o'clock, 8:11, 8:16, 8:26. And then the ping data overlaps on top of that AT&T did, and you can get a general idea how her phone traveled through the northwestern part of Decatur County.
Okay. And so do you have a map that you did?
Yes, I did this map and it was done in 2012.
Yeah, I'd like to see the map. And I'd like to show it to the state because I want to put this in as an offer of proof also. The state has this map in smaller form. Okay. And I'd like to have this map just marked as an exhibit.
All right, the exhibit 239 must be passed to the jury because it's offer of proof.
And I'm going to pass the map back up to you. And there's some handwritten points on this map. Let's see, I think at some point you have recorded where Terry Britt's house is. Can you point that out?
It's right here.
How did I do this?
Anyway.
So the prosecutor can see at the same time. If I put it up over here, then the prosecutor.
Y'all can look at it. I know the map, so.
We can what?
I said you can show them the map. I know the map. If you ask
Oh,
questions,
okay.
I don't have to
So,
look at it.
I'll point it out to here. Here, I'll see it at the same time. So here is Terry Britt's
Yes.
house. That's where you marked his home, isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And So when you were doing this route, let's just start down here. This is the Bobo home,
Yes, that's the Bobo home on Swan Johnson Road.
okay? And so from the Bobo home, then how did you determine which direction Holly's phone traveled?
You can look in the way the cell towers hit. She hits on the northern side of the Darden Road Tower
Okay.
at 8 o'clock and 8:11. At
Yes.
8:16, she's on the south side of the Shallow Road Tower.
Now, where's the Shallow Road Tower? Is that up here?
You can see the 816 hit right there,
So the Shallow Road Tower
Yes.
is right over
right there.
here.
That's where Shallow Road Tower, but it comes into that cell section at 8:16.
Okay.
So you know that the information's going forward. I also, AT&T also provided information that I worked with them on using Holly's phone. Instead of just an overlay map, we used Holly's phone to kind of get an idea of what towers it would be talking to at any one time.
Okay.
So AT&T provided
Now,
that information.
Tell me, how did you do that? What do you mean about what towers you'd be talking to at any one time?
It's just like they take Holly's phone and we drove around and kind of mapped which towers it would communicate with.
Okay, let me find for you then a drive map that I had it marked for identification yesterday. No, I'm talking about the one that I have marked for identification through Terry Dicus. So this is 218. So when you say that you had it, you drove around with the phone, is this what you're talking about?
Yes, that's it.
Now, were you with them when they drove around and did this?
Yes.
So you were actually in the car as this
I was
map
in the back.
being
I was in the back
created?
seat taking notes.
Okay. And you were invited by the TBI to do that?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So, using that map, and then did you also use this?
Yeah, that's the overlay map that AT&T provided.
Okay. So you
That shows cell towers and cell sections in different colors. Is what that is. Three-sided towers.
Okay. And so using those materials, how did you then make your determination as to, so you knew
You
from-
take the Excel spreadsheets provided by AT&T, and you look at the terminating number, her number, the number that was called, and you, in the column, you compare it to the column where the cell tower is, such as the Darden Road Tower. If you were going down the bottom of the map, it goes from Darden Road Tower Section 1 into the south side of Shallow Road Tower Section 2, and then it goes up into this area, it goes into the number 1 section of Shallow Road Tower.
So this is the number 1 section of the Shallow Road Tower.
Yes, that's 1,
up
2,
here.
and 3 is over here. That's number
So-
1 section.
At first, she's hitting
And if you
down
look
here,
at, yes,
and then you know if she's hitting up here, she had to have traveled on some road.
well, the phone hits 3 times headed that direction. Ping data is in that area.
Okay.
Ping data is different than a cell phone hit.
Okay, and so explain to us how the ping data is different.
That's when the AT&T sends out a signal to this tower to talk to the phone.
Okay, and the ping data, is it simply a dot with a circle drawn around it, or is it something more than that? Does it relate to a sector?
I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know if I'm authorized to answer that, how that works.
Well, we can ask for we can,
Okay?
yes, you're authorized to answer.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, yes, she just answered, yes, you're authorized.
he gave it a nod. I have an AUSA. I have an AUSA that's monitoring my
Yeah,
conversation.
I just didn't see that he was apparently motioning from behind me.
So you have an attorney here today, is that right?
And that's Assistant United States Attorney sitting.
And he's here to guide you on what you're authorized to answer and not
Yes,
answer? Okay.
yes.
So the ping data, it has.
What he's saying is he doesn't want to breach some
Yeah.
pledge of confidentiality.
Exactly.
All right.
So this, the ping data, how is it that you interpret the ping data then?
A ping data is a distance off of the tower.
Yes?
It's by signal strength. It can be anywhere. It's not necessarily a circled spot. It's actually a spot that's a distance off of the tower based on signal strength, and AT&T can tell you that. But it's more of an arch around distance off of the tower in that section. It's anywhere in that section, a certain distance off all the way around.
Okay.
And you have to, and it depends on the quality and number of towers and that, to how wide that margin of error is in that kind of a band that runs around.
Okay.
Because it can be narrow and it can be a quarter mile wide, so.
So at some point, there's a ping. Do you know what time the ping was that was, you say there's a ping that was in this?
It's sometime around 8:52, 8:53. I don't know exactly. I'd have to look at my notes to know for sure.
Okay. So there's a ping, and that ping isn't just anywhere with a circle drawn around it. You're saying that ping is coming off of this particular quadrant?
Yes.
And this is the Shiloh Tower, is that right?
Shallow Road Tower, Section 1.
Now, that's not the same tower where her body is found over here, is it?
No, that's where her body was found.
Okay. Her body's found, what tower was her body found in?
Shallow Road Tower, Section 1.
No, where was her body found? Not what was it hitting off of?
Oh, no, see that dot where your finger is?
Yes.
It's right in that area right there. There's a Verizon tower see that bottom, that X, the other one X? That's a Verizon tower. She was found just north of that tower.
But that tower wasn't a factor in the
No,
towers
it was
you were-
not, no.
Okay. Okay, so, then how do you then start moving this direction? Why did you decide that her phone moved this direction?
It's because it goes into that area and it stays about 25 minutes.
Which area does it stay 25 minutes?
Into this Shallow Road cell, Section 1. It goes in there, stays about 25 minutes.
This section one right here?
The one, yes, that section right there.
Okay.
It goes into that section, stays about 25 minutes.
Yes.
And then it starts moving east because it starts pinging off of the Cox Road Tower at 902, 906.
Now, the Cox Road Tower,
If you'll go slide
it
over.
is over, it's over right here, isn't
Right.
that right?
Yes,
Okay.
right. It has a couple of pings over there. The 902 is further away than the 906 hit, so it shows that the phone is moving toward the tower.
Okay. Okay, so you have the phone moving towards the tower. And then, how do you get this little trail down here?
There is another hit off of the Cox Road Tower. Not the, I think it's the second section. I have to look at for sure, but it's off of another section. You can see that line right there by your finger. That's where
Yes.
the two sections break, and that is on another section of the Cox Road Tower.
So this is where the Cox Road Tower breaks, right here,
Yes, that line right through there, it breaks.
right along this line.
Right.
Okay,
And there is a margin of error in there, a little distance between, sections are not exactly on the money. There is an overlay a little bit.
so you're saying that you could be hitting on both either Cox Road 2 section or Cox Road 3 and still be right in the middle where it
Right.
bleeds.
Right, exactly.
Okay. And so,
And then there's a Parsons section, I believe it's section 3, there's a ping off of that one. And it goes, that's more down toward where I believe it to be at the Creek at Gates Road.
and you have that the Parsons Tower is actually off of your map in this direction.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
Okay,
also a
so-
ping.
What is this right here, this mark?
That's the Creek at Gooch Road.
Okay.
And I have that in there, that little area in there, because when you do the drive time, that's about where you're at. You're in between that, you're right in that area when you do a drive time
Okay.
on this map.
So what you did is you looked at where her pings were, and then you looked at, as you're driving, what towers you're hitting.
Yes, because it was originally thought that her phone had went west, but if you drive west, 816, you're either going to be on the Darden Road or the Yuma Tower. So it's very clear that her phone went straight north.
So,
And if you were to go east at any point, you would be on the Parsons Tower at 816. So it becomes very clear that at 8 o'clock her phone's Darden Road, 811 Darden Road, and 816. It's in the shallow road section. And the shallow road section, there's a lot of two other towers that kind of cover the east and west. So you know it goes straight north.
so you know it goes straight north because if it had gone this direction, you'd be hitting this Darden Road Tower right here, which is this
And actually,
green
there's
color.
another tower over there that's called the Huma Tower. That's a very powerful tower.
Where's
but you
the
can't-
Yuma Tower? Is it?
It's in the north or west area.
So it's further west
Yeah,
from.
it's on the freeway. It's further northwest. It's a very powerful tower that if you get anywhere near that, it picks you up.
Okay, so you know she's not going west because she doesn't hit the Darden Tower and she doesn't hit the Yuma Tower.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
that's how you know she's going mostly north
Yes.
on her phone. And then based on this, did you actually tell did you advise the TBIs where to be looking for her body?
Yes.
And where did you advise the TBI to be looking for her body?
Near the freeway. This
Near
is
the
in
freeway.
late 2011, 2012. I asked numerous times to Agent Dicus, how well did you search north of the freeway?
And
Numerous
you
times.
specifically north of the freeway?
Absolutely.
Because that's where her phone had popped.
Yes.
And then when it turns out, and these red dots here that you have outlined on this map, what are these red dots represent?
Those red dots I put on there because I didn't have a way to kind of overlay it. That's just areas you should search. Those are roads, and I put primary, first, second area in 2012, and I made this map. This is where you should search
And
off of these roads.
You made this map before they found her body.
Yes, a couple of years before.
Well, obviously, but the red marks and everything, I mean, you didn't go back and put down, this was,
I added two things to the map from the original creation. I added Terry Britt's home sometime
Yeah.
in 2013, and I added a dot where you pointed her finger where her remains were found. I added that in October of 2014.
okay. But these red marks and stuff, this advice of where you said to search for her body,
Yes.
all of that
I
was-
put this on a map in 2012, on a map about 3 foot square for
Yes.
Terry Dykes. And it was in the file as far as I knew.
Okay. And said, search along these red dots for her body,
Yes.
that's where her body most likely is gonna be. Okay. Your Honor, that's all for my,
Just a couple. You would agree with me that the drive test that you guys did, or when you jumped in the back seat of the AT&T, that was an incomplete drive test. Y'all didn't drive all the roads.
I had one follow-up, but yes, I drew the roads that matched the cell phone information off of the Excel spreadsheet.
So that's a yes. The drive test was incomplete. You guys didn't
No,
drive
it was
all
not
the-
incomplete.
All right. And then the next thing I have is that,
Did you say no, it was not incomplete?
No,
it was-
I was satisfied with the drive test.
so he does not agree with that the drive test was incomplete. And I know.
I did have one follow-up, but
I'm going on to my next question because the
Okay.
judge has ruled you're not an expert. I think I know what you were talking about, but it sounded as though you were implying that you drove around with Holly's phone.
no.
Right. When you said we drove around with the phone, that you weren't driving around with Holly's phone. We didn't, correct?
Can I answer that? There was 4 exact copies of Holly's phone based on cell wattage, model, make.
I understand. But you weren't driving around with Holly's phone. That was all I
No.
was trying to clear up.
Not Holly's phone.
That's all I have, Judge. Oh, well, except for, this report that we all have now of your findings regarding the phones, you did not make that report until after Holly's remains were found.
What are you saying?
Okay. We have a report from you, and it says, abduction investigation of
Okay,
Holly
okay.
Bobo. It's your report. It talks about cell towers. And even though you said, let's see, the following information was provided to TBI during the first 2 years of the abduction investigation, descriptive maps were provided. So that makes it sound like that this report was turned over in the first 2
The
years.
map was given a TBI, yes.
So my question was, you didn't do this big report. I know you turned over a map, you
Did she
said.
pass in the report?
He said he's familiar with it.
I'm familiar with it. That, I reminded TBI that there was a map in that file
Okay. My question is, you didn't do this report until after Holly was found.
after the remains were found, yes. Because I was concerned about that there's a map on the file that shows where her remains should be located. I was
So
concerned about
My
that.
question was, you didn't do this report until after her remains were found.
Right, because I
Okay.
was reminding TBI where her remains were found. There's a map in the file.
And of course, you weren't the only one. You know that Special Agent Frizzell was also telling TBI to look in the same area, correct?
I didn't know that.
Okay. But you relied heavily upon FBI behavioral analyst who said 2 or 3 different things, and y'all were sort of going off of that information.
I didn't really believe that in the beginning, but it matched the phone tracking.
You didn't believe it in the beginning?
No, because the FBI person said that she was killed within the first hour within 5 miles of the house, and I didn't understand that at the time.
Gotcha. Thank you.
When you said, just regarding Holly's phone, there were 4 phones that were the identical model as Holly's phone that you were in the car using to see which tower they hit off as you drove all the back roads.
Yes.
Okay. And then,
I did, AT&T set that up. I just assisted, went
Right.
with AT&T.
right. Also, for the record, Your Honor, as we were going through that, I was referring to, was it 218? The 218, that little drive time map, and then the newest map that he provided, that Mr. Walker provided, as I was pointing to different areas.
That's 239.
239, okay.
Okay.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd like for the court to reconsider admitting him or authorizing him as an expert witness after he's testified and I've made my offer of proof.
He has, by his own admission, said he is not an expert in cellular phone, as far as testifying. He can testify generally what he did as far as his work on this case, but he is not qualified as a cell phone expert, so he won't offer evidence along those lines.
So he cannot
He
testify
can't express his opinion on that.
before the jury as to what he's just testified
No.
to? Okay.
All right, let's bring the jury back in. Okay, some further questions?
Yes. Mr. Walker, at some point were you asked to go interview Terry Britt?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And can you tell us when that occurred?
I believe it was in March of 2013.
Okay. And will you tell the jury then who asked you and kind of what happened from there?
In March of 2013, Agent Dicus called me. I had not worked in the case for a few months. He'd called me and said, he asked me if I could do a favor. He asked if I could go and interview Terry Britt in jail. He was in jail over near Fort Pillow, I think it's Western Tennessee Penitentiary. And he said that I could,
Objective hearsay is what Agent Dykes told him.
So
okay.
just after that, what did you do next then?
After I was asked,
Yeah.
I went and interviewed him in jail.
Okay, so tell us about that, how that conversation went. What happened then?
We went into an interview room, and I was, just to give context, I was there just to ask if he wanted to talk about where Holly's remains were and kind of maybe some type of deal about where her body was. And they put us in a room, it's probably a 10-foot wide by 20-foot wide room, had a big window on one end with a door going in. I went in, Mr. Britt was already in there, and I said immediately to him, I'm here to talk about, I'm John Walker with the U.S. Marshals. He knows who I am, because I've spoken with him before. And told him who I was, and said, I'm here to talk about Holly Bobo. He made the comment, I don't know who that is. And I said, well, you don't know her, but you know her cousin Natalie. And he sat down at the table. There was a table between us, and I sat down on this side. I said, I was sent over here by Agent Dicus to see if you wanted to work out some kind of possibly deal about locating her remains because the family needs some kind of closure in this case. They need to know what happened to their daughter. He started complaining about that his wife, Jan, that he wasn't able to talk to her, that they had TBI had where he couldn't communicate with his wife. And I said, well, I thought that was unusual, that I would talk to TBI about it. We discussed, I didn't ask him anything about what he's in custody for, other than I said, I know there's some charges on you. One of them can carry a lot of time. We didn't discuss a penitentiary type times. What was discussed is that he was concerned about his wife being charged in one of the cases because I thought there was pending charges coming on her. And he was concerned about, he wanted to be in a different jail. He did not like the jail over there. He said there was a lot of young black guys that were very loud, and he wanted to be over in near Nashville in an older white jail. He didn't seem to mind being in jail. So I said, well, I want to tell you what we know in the case from beginning to end, what the evidence has kind of shown. And I went to explain that to him. And I said, I know you're a sociopath, and I know you have an issue with women. There's no doubt about it, and I understand why you would find Holly Bobo attractive and want her. He just sat there and kind of nodded. I then went into, I said, I'm going to tell you what we believe happened. I said, we think that you saw Holly at the dollar store with Natalie probably about 3 weeks before you started following her. We know you follow other women. And I think what we think that you started figuring out her timeline and followed her home, started paying attention to the vehicles, that you got there probably around 7:30 that morning, and you know all the back roads very well. We know that. And that you were in the woods.
How did you know that about the back roads?
A friend of his told me that's what all he ever did was drive around. A friend of Terry Brits.
Well,
It's
without,
too late because she asked for a question calling for hearsay. But I object to anything a friend or anybody else other
Okay.
than Mr. Britt told him.
Yes, yes,
I
ma'am.
wasn't trying to get hearsay. I just said, how did you know about him knowing the back roads? That's all. Go ahead.
Okay. And I said, what you did was you got in the wood around 7:30 that morning. You noticed that her mother's car was gone. You noticed her father's car was gone, and you thought Clint Bobo's car was gone. But it was actually in a garage out back. I said, you know Holly comes out at 7:45. I said, you position yourself to grab her when she came out. She fought with you for about 45 seconds because Mr. Barnes, the next door neighbor, heard you fighting for about 45 seconds. And he heard it. So, and I said, then you squatted down underneath the patio with her after fighting with her. You probably hit her because there was blood on the patio. You squatted down with her and was waiting on her to recover, I guess, from that, because Clint Bobo at that time looked out the window and saw you seeing with Holly. And I said, you waited, and he called his mother at that time. There's a record where he called his mother at that time, talking to her about who's outside. And I said, you waited till about 8:56 before you're walking away with him, because there's another cell record where Clint Bobo.
How about cell records?
Well, what time calls are made is layperson.
This isn't being offered as expert on what cases go.
And I said, Clint Bobo told me that he saw you walking into the woods with his sister.
Okay, well, that's
while-
something that's in evidence, Your Honor, is that Clint Bobo's on the phone with his mother.
It's hearsay nevertheless.
Okay.
Okay.
So regardless of what Clint said,
Okay.
just what you knew.
And I said, and I got a description
I'm
from,
gonna object
I
to
got- and I
that.
got,
This is what he told Terry Britt he knew.
Okay. This is what you told Terry Britt you knew.
He's still on the narrative of
Yes.
what he told Terry Britt.
Yes.
Okay.
yes, ma'am. And I said, her brother describes you as being 5'10" to 5'11", 200 pounds, barrel-chested, skinny legs, black hair that went over your collar, probably wearing a baseball cap, a camouflage jacket, blue jeans, and some type of work boots. And when I said that to him, he replied to me, that boy don't know what he saw. And I said, you got in your car around 8 o'clock, you drove north using the least traveled roads or with the fewest houses, you got to the freeway around 8:30, you spent about 25 minutes near the freeway, and I said when you left that area, you started throwing things of Holly's out along Yellow Springs Road, such as a receipt, a wadded piece of paper, a dollar bill. And I said, you stopped when you got near your house and you headed down and threw the rest of the items, the larger items, into the creek on Gooch Road. That's around 925. And I said, you would know that creek on Gooch Road because you drive down that road to go home. And I said, when you came out of that, you got home probably around 9:35, and your wife awoke, Jan awoke, when the dogs were barking. And about before I finished saying that final word, he interrupted me and looked at me very, very straightforward and said, sounds like you have it all figured out. I'll plead to it and you can close the case. I was very surprised by his comment. I didn't expect him to say that. I thought for a moment, I said, well, you got to do better than that. You got to give us her body. And he made a comment that I didn't understand at the time. His comment was, I can't give you something I don't have. I said, well, I need TBI here to finish this up. I do not want to take a statement from him. I was not there to get testimonial evidence. I said, TBI needs to be here. I got up to leave. I got up from the chair, walked to the door, waited for the guard to let me out. He got up and walked up behind me, and he said, if I need to show you something, how long will you take me to get you out of here? And get me out of here. And I said, it'd take me a couple of days. I'd have to get a writ to get him out of jail. And then he made some comment about Terry Dicus getting him out of jail, and that's the last I talked to him.
And did you relate all of this information to the TBI?
Yes, I did.
And as far as you know, did they
I put it in a USM report, USM 11, and gave it to TBI.
Okay. And as far as you know, did the TBI go back to follow up with an interview?
Myself and Dicus tried much later, but he was not in the mood then. He wanted to be, they didn't follow up the next few days like I told him that they were probably going to do. That did not happen.
Okay. But you notified them right away, is
Yes.
that right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And so, did you think he was kidding with you when he said he offered to?
Object to relevance.
His opinion as to what he thought.
Well, he can testify.
Don't argue in front of the jury. If you feel like they dad something, we can send them back out. I've made a little.
Okay.
A witness can't say whether he thought someone was serious or telling the truth or things like that.
You're trained law enforcement officer, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. You have your entire career been dealing with criminal defendants and kind of the criminal side of human nature, is that right?
Yes.
And you have lots of experience and training in interviewing suspects. Is that true?
Yes, I do.
And you've been around when people have, you made a report in this matter. I think the U.S. Marshal Service calls it, what do you all call your reports?
The USM 11.
The U.S. 11?
Yes, USM 11.
And that's kind of the equivalent of a FBI 302, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And you certainly, when you make reports, you put down things that you take seriously and that are important. You put down important facts in your reports, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And these are all facts that you included in your report?
Yes.
Okay. And you shared that report with the TBI at that time?
Yes.
Okay. No further questions?
Cross-examination.
Yes, sir. You're friends with Terry Dicus, is my understanding.
I got to know Terry Dicus, yes. I've never spent any evenings or weekends with him, but yes, I am
I
friends.
didn't ask you about spending the night with him. You're friends with him.
Yes.
And you became friends with him during the course of the investigation, or were you friends before?
During the course of the investigation.
Okay. And the friendship continued afterwards, correct?
Yes.
Still friends with him today?
Yes.
So you were aware when Terry Dicus called you and asked for a favor that he had been advised by his supervisor to stand down, leave Terry Britt alone.
I did not know that.
He can ask.
And you didn't find it odd that the case agent had to call you and ask for a favor to
No,
go talk to
he
someone?
explained what he was asking me.
So you go in to talk to Mr. Britt, right?
Yes, yes,
Put you in a room, and you, according to your report, and your report, back up, you testified in great detail today for 10 or 15 minutes about all the things that you told Mr. Britt, about how you know what he did, and this is what I know about the case. None of that's included in your report.
no, the report's very general.
Yeah. So all of that stuff that you say today, that you told him back in 2013, you just left all that out. Yes?
Yes, I just put this,
So
I put the
let's
main
start at
facts in.
that. Then. Let's assume that you told him all that. So you're talking to a guy that's doing time, correct?
Yes,
He's looking at potential federal gun charges, correct?
I guess so. I don't,
Well, no,
I believe,
you
yes,
knew.
I believe he was having an abduction charge and a gun charge.
Did you make the statement to him? I told Mr. Britt that he was possibly also being indicted for federal firearms violations, and one case could carry a 30-year sentence.
Yes,
So that helps you remember what you actually told.
yes,
Okay. And if that is actually, let me just pass this report up to you. And so if that statement is actually the first full paragraph of your 20-line report, that doesn't mean, does that mean that that's how you started your talk with him? Telling him that he's looking at 30 more years?
no, that
Okay.
doesn't mean it's,
You just put it at the top. Because it actually says, I initially, meaning in the beginning. Right? That's what that word means. In the beginning, I questioned Mr. Britt if he had been federally charged.
yes,
Okay. He said no, but his wife had. And then you told him, buddy, it's coming. Something's going to carry 30 years.
okay,
Not okay. Yes or no?
yes,
Because if you put it in the report, that's what happened.
yes, that's what happened.
And if you didn't put it in the report,
Mischaracterization, Your Honor. He doesn't say that it is coming. He says it is possible that he would be charged. So she's mischaracterizing the report as she questions the witness.
and he
Go
did.
ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Right?
What's your question again?
That's what you told me. Initially, as in the beginning.
We discussed many things when I went in, more about Holly and her family
But
before I actually talked
everything's
about.
not initially. In your report, it says initially.
Yeah, before I got into the story about what we thought.
Okay. So before you got into the story about what you thought, you told him, hey, you may be looking at 30 more years.
Yes,
So the way this report runs, if it's in the report, it happened. But stuff that's not in your report could also have happened.
yes,
Okay. You didn't Mirandize the man.
I was not looking for testimonial evidence.
Excuse me?
I was not looking for testimonial evidence.
So even though you're not looking for testimonial evidence, you started with, tell us what you know about where Holly is, and I can get you a deal.
I didn't do it that way.
Let me
That's not the way it went.
finish. If you made statements to the man about wanting him to come forth with where Holly's remains were, and you're telling us that you don't consider that to be testimonial? Just yes or no, and then you can explain.
I was not there to get testimonial evidence.
Yes or no, and then explain. Let's not
Ask
allow
your
technicalities.
question again?
Don't allow technicalities. You ask the man, tell us where the dead girl is. That's your question, right?
Yes,
And you're saying, you're telling the jury that you don't consider that testimonial evidence?
I was not there to get testimonial evidence.
Is that like some buzzwords? that
No,
you've
it's
been
just
told
true.
to
I
say?
was not there to get testimonial
Okay.
evidence.
So
It
in
was
other words-
TBI's responsibility.
In other words, if he had said, she's under my driveway,
I would advise TBI that, and they could go talk to him about it.
Because you didn't Mirandize him.
Your Honor, whether or not you Mirandize him, he doesn't necessarily have to Mirandize him.
And
That's
not an objection.
That is an
That's
objection,
a
Your Honor.
statement, okay?
Okay, so my objection is, I object to the way
The
it's
question
forming the
is, did
question.
you Mirandize him? No, I didn't.
No, it did
Okay?
not.
So according to your testimony today, even though it's not in your 20-line report, is that you went through your case theory about what had happened to Holly.
It was
And they-
also TBI's.
I'm
case.
sorry, if you can just answer the question first, and then if you want to add something, which you tend to want to do or explain, then do it.
It just wasn't mine. It was TBI's.
So that's a yes. You
Yeah.
explained him your theory. Nobody else is up here, correct?
Yes, okay,
Okay.
yeah.
And you told him, according to what you said today, this is what we know, Mr. Britt. And then you went through a litany of facts, right?
Correct.
Right. And then he responded, sounds like you got it all figured out.
Correct.
Did you tell him, Mr. Britt, we know that Shane, Dylan, and Jason alibied one another on the morning it happened? Did you tell him that?
No.
Did you tell him, Mr. Britt, we know that Zachary Adams said, I couldn't have picked a prettier bitch? Did you tell him that?
No.
Did you tell him, Mr. Britt, we know that Zach Adams said, I can't clear my name because I'm too far into it?
No, I did not tell him that.
Did you tell him, Mr. Britt, I'm here asking you to tell me where Holly Bobo's body is, but we know, Zach Adams said, I did it.
No, I didn't tell him that.
Did you tell him, I'm here asking you to tell me where Holly Bobo's body is, but Zach Adams has said on more than one occasion, I let Shane hit it. Did you tell him that?
No, I did not.
Did you tell him, despite the fact that I'm here asking you where Holly is, Mr. Britt, the man that was with Zach Adams when he shot her in the head has confessed to being with him?
No, I didn't tell him that.
Did you tell him, Mr. Britt, I'm here asking about Holly, and for you to tell me where she is, but the man who purchased or traded for dope, the murder weapon,
It would be impossible to tell him these
has
comments.
told us
Because
where it is?
this all happened after I interviewed him.
Is that a no? You didn't tell him?
No, it's not possible.
Did you tell him that that man who told us where that he purchased the murder weapon or traded the murder weapon and told us where it is, we went out there and found it?
No.
You'd agree with me, you didn't have all the facts when you went to do a favor for Terry Dicus that day?
I would not agree to that.
You would not?
No, I would not.
You don't. So.
When I
now
talked, that
let me
happened
ask you-
after me
I'm sorry,
talking.
let me ask a question.
No, he's trying to
If-
explain, Your Honor.
Wait. Is that an explanation? He can make an explanation. Give it now to you.
You're asking me stuff that happened after I spoke with Terry Britt, so I don't know how I could tell him about something that happened afterwards. I mean,
So my question
yeah,
was,
so.
you didn't know the full facts.
At the time I talked to Terry Britt, I knew the full facts.
If these are the facts, can you not just look at those people
Oh,
and
yeah,
tell
sure.
them, I don't know what happened after 2013. I didn't know all the facts. Can you not agree to that?
I can't comment on that. I'm not allowed.
Not allowed by who?
U.S. Attorney's Office.
Is he allowed, Mr. U.S. Attorney? Is that a yes? Sure, let's approach.
I think rather than client, it's supervisory capacity. All right.
Ask it again, please.
You would agree with me, would you not, that after 2013, you don't know what happened in this case? You weren't a part of the investigation.
I was not a part of the investigation.
And despite the innuendo that maybe perhaps you're wanting to leave with the jury, so when Terry Britt was listening to you talk about potential deals that you might be able to get for him.
It wasn't me. I wasn't getting deals.
I'm sorry. Do you need to read your report?
I have no authority to make a deal. That's up to
Right.
the TBI and the U.S. and the attorney, prosecutor. That's not me.
You weren't acting on behalf of the district attorney's office, were you?
No, it was not.
And you were not acting on behalf of the U.S. attorney's office, the
No.
federal prosecutors.
No, it was not.
You were not asked by anyone other than Terry Dicus to go to that location, were you?
Correct.
And nobody in TBI, no one asked you to try and reach a deal with him other than Terry Dicus.
I was not there to get a deal. I was asked if he wanted to talk.
You were not there to get a deal?
No. I was asked to go speak with Terry Britt to see if he wanted to talk about possibly making an arrangement, some type of deal with TBI. I wasn't the person making the deal.
What's different about what I said and what you just did?
Is that you're trying to act like I'm the one making the deal. I'm not. I'm just a person out there. All I'm out there with is to find out if he wanted to talk to TBI, and he did. That's all I was there for.
That's not what you asked him. You asked him to give you information about Holly Bobo.
I asked him to get TBI information about Holly Bobo.
And if it, I'm gonna pass this. Show me where that's how you reported it. Review that for me. That's your report.
I testified to it.
Tell me where it is in your report.
That is a very general report about some things that occurred in that interview.
So it's not in there. is
To
it?
let TBI know that he's wanting to talk, they should go speak with him. That's what the report's about.
It's
The report,
it's not in there, is it?
say again what you think is not in there?
You forget my question for adding.
No, I just want to make
It's
sure we're
not in
clear.
there that TBI was the one making the deal.
You can say, is it in there?
Is what in there, Your Honor?
No, it's not. I don't understand the
Witness
question.
understood it. You don't understand the question? Nowhere in your report did you tell Terry Britt that I am here just as a mouthpiece for Terry Dicus. I can't really offer you a deal, but I want to work one out for you so that I can go back to them and tell them what you're willing to do.
Your Honor, he has not testified that he's a mouthpiece for Terry Dicus. That's a mischaracterization.
It's not.
It is.
She can describe it any way she wants to, okay? It's up to the jury.
Mr. Britt seemed very suspicious of your interview, didn't he?
No, he did not. Well,
I'm so- no-
wait, hang on, let me explain. Okay,
Now,
go
let
ahead.
me follow up. Did you literally just say, no, he did
No,
not?
he said no.
You said suspicious of his interview.
Read along with me and tell me if I read it wrong. Mr. Britt seemed suspicious of the interview. Did I read it wrong?
No, you read it right.
Now you want to explain?
Yes, I'll explain.
How about it?
Okay. He seemed suspicious that I was there talking to him initially, but once I laid out, hey, TBI wants to know where her remains are. If you're willing to talk about it, maybe you can keep your wife from being charged. He was very concerned about that. He kind of changed his tone during the interview. Okay?
Okay. I want you to read your report and then tell me where you reported that he changed his tone.
It's not in there. I'm just telling you
Sorry.
what happened. So,
So you reported that he was suspicious,
yeah.
and at some point in your 20-line report, he changed his tone, but you didn't put that in here. Right?
No.
Okay. So this is just one more example of, if you wrote it down, it happened. But there are a lot of things that happened that you didn't write down.
Yes.
Nothing else.
Regret.
Now, to be clear, a report is not a transcript of what happens, is it?
To the leading judge.
Is a
You can
report a
ask him,
transcript?
Is this a transcript?
Is this a transcript of what happened that
No.
day? Okay. When you write reports, do you usually go back and write word for word everything people said?
No.
Do you usually are they usually generalized when you write a report?
Yes.
Okay. Now, to be clear, before a federal employee is allowed to come testify, what kind of request needs to be made? Like, if any federal employee, before they come to testify in court, what type of request has to be made?
TUI request?
A TUI request?
TUI request, yes.
Of what?
A TUI?
TUI request.
TUI request?
You want to spell that?
I don't know. I don't know how to spell it. It's an odd name. It's a TUI request.
Anybody know? The only TUI I know is from
TOUTH.
Blindside. Okay.
And so the purpose of that is that the United States Attorney knows, what is the purpose? You just tell us.
The purpose is that my testimony before I was a federal officer or agent, my testimony has to be approved through the United States Attorney's Office. It's to protect against me talking outside of my scope, not giving up trade secrets, things of that nature.
Now, did the state of Tennessee make a request that you testify about the notebook in this case that you found?
Yes.
Okay. Did the defense make a request that you testify about cellular telephone records in this case?
Yes.
Did the defense make a request that you testify about your interview with Mr. Britt?
Yes.
Now, you performed a lot of other activities in this case, is that right?
Yes, I did.
Interviews,
Yes.
analysis, but those items were not requested that you testify about them.
No, they were not.
So you're not authorized to say what else you knew about the case or what else you did in the case,
That
are
is
you?
correct.
Had that been requested,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to relevance.
It wasn't requested in the last bench conference we covered some things.
I know, but
You don't need to open the door to what we covered in that bench conference with his superior.
right, but my point, Your Honor, is that's
I'm
why
gonna object to relevance to
she,
anything he hasn't testified about. How can anything that he was asked to do or did, if it's not being testified to, be relevant?
she just went through such a long fuss with him about what did he know about the investigation, what did he do about the investigation. I can't cross-examine him about all the rest of the investigation because he's not been authorized to testify to it, Your Honor.
Let's move on.
Okay. No further questions.
Done? All right. Step down, you're free to go.
John, can we approach before you've excused it?
Hold on, Mr. Walker. Yes, sir. All right, call your next witness. Do what?
Christy Gaskell. She'll have to spell that.
Christie or Y. I can spell it.
It's Gutsell. It's Gutgsell, I think.
We'll
Christy.
we'll get it spelled. I've been doing it with every witness. Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, sir.
Be seated, state your name first and last, and spell for the court reporter, please.
It's Christie, Kristie. Last name is Gugasell, Gutgsell.
Would you,
On the Christie, is it IE or Y? I missed that.
I'm sorry, IE.
Okay. All right, keep proceeding.
so how is it that you are employed currently?
Currently,
Yes.
I work at a medical clinic currently.
Okay, and what were you doing in April of 2011?
I was a bail bondsman,
Okay, and what company were you with?
professional bonding.
Okay, and in April of 2011, did you happen to bond out Zach Adams?
I did.
Okay, can you please tell the jury what happened and what that was about?
I believe it was April the 4th. I bonded Zach out. Was when he was at Natchez Trace, and he got several charges, drug charges and evading arrest, and I got him out on those charges that day.
Okay, and so when you bonded him out, did you happen to observe him and his physical appearance?
I did. After I bonded him out and he was released from jail, that's when we do our paperwork and talk and go through what I expect from him while he's out on bond.
And what did you observe?
I observed basically he had scratches all over him, like he had ran through the woods basically, and he also had like old scars on his arms.
And what were the old scars on his arms from?
Objection, Your Honor, cause of speculation.
If she knows.
If you know.
Unless she was there, I don't see how she could know.
We'll strike it, Your Honor. Okay. And what about his legs?
He had scratches all over his legs, his arms, his neck.
His neck also?
Absolutely.
Okay. No further questions?
Cross.
No questions.
All right, step in. Before you go.
Yes, sir.
If our special, our time restricted witness is not here, I'd like one more time just to see if he's here.
All right.
Mr. Garnett, just check and see if Mr. Garnett is outside.
This person, I understand, is military on leave, very short window of time that he has.
Yes, and our next witness is going to be fairly lengthy, so if he's available. No, okay. Then we'd like to call John Reeves.
Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Be seated, state your name first and last, and spell it for the court reporter.
My name is Jonathan Reeves, JONATHANREEVES.
And can you speak up, please? Your voice is... Can you move the microphone closer to you?
Am I that tall? Is that better?
Yes. Okay, and Mr. Reeves, how is it that you're currently employed?
I am president of JDR Telecom Solutions. I consult for wireless carriers throughout the U.S., designing cell phone networks and troubleshooting, optimizing, and essentially making sure that they work. When you hear the guy say, "Can you hear me now?" I'm one of those guys.
Okay. And so let's go back to the beginning. What's your training to design cellular telephone networks?
Initially, I have a Bachelor's of Science of Engineering. from Grove City College in Pennsylvania. Since then, I've been trained throughout the process with different companies on how to design the RF engineering, the implementation of cell sites. Been trained on the actual individual vendor equipment, the different technologies.
Can you go into detail on some of the training that you've had, the vendor equipment, the technologies?
If this helps, Judge, I've had a chance to speak with Mr. Reeves quickly this morning, and I'll stipulate with regard to his expertise.
All right. They're willing to stipulate you can go into some if you feel it's important, but he's stipulated an expert in cellular phone technology. Would that be the appropriate?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Okay. And so in this case, did you have an opportunity to review materials regarding Holly Bobo's telephone and the telephones of different persons in this case?
I have, yes.
And did you prepare a report?
I have, yes.
Okay. And I would like to, this time, I'd like to ask that this report be put into evidence, Your Honor. Let me pass it up to you.
The 240.
See if you recognize this.
It's,
Just making sure it's here. Yes.
okay.
The 240.
And have you prepared a PowerPoint demonstration?
Yes, this report has essentially just been presented in PowerPoint on the board behind me. And if I could request the clicker is right next to my laptop. Just,
Clicker's right next to his laptop, he said.
thank you.
So which telephone numbers did you review?
The numbers that I reviewed are listed on the screen here.
Okay.
They include Holly Bobo's, Zach Adams,
Well, just go in order. So the first one belongs to,
Zach Adams,
okay, the next one?
and I'm going from memory on these, but I believe the next one is Jason Autry.
Yes. And
The next one is Holly Bobo.
Yes.
And the third one is Shane Austin.
The fourth one?
Oh, sorry, fourth one is Shane Austin.
Yes. Okay. So,
I reviewed them
Let
for,
me get that order again. Holly,
no, sorry,
Yes,
the order is
Zach.
Zach Adams,
Zach, okay.
Jason Autry, Holly Bobo, and Shane Austin.
Okay, thank you.
So the information that I reviewed was the information that was provided to me that my understanding was provided to law enforcement as part of this proceeding, including the locates that were performed on Holly Bobo's phone the day of her disappearance.
okay. So what is the locate information that you have?
So there's two general sources of information. I know you guys have already heard about some of this, and that's great because it makes my job a little bit easier. You guys have already gotten the brief crash course on this. But the information I have is both call records, and those are the call detail reports that you'd seen Agent Frizzell last week present to you, as well as the locate records. And the locate records were the queries that were sent out looking for Holly Bobo's phone on the day of her abduction. The difference between those two pieces of information are pretty stark, meaning the call records are all historic. So we can go back to those at any point in the past and pull up the call records in order to see what activity was done on a phone at any given date and time. That includes text messages, voice calls, even data sessions in some cases, depending on the device. So we have the ability to look back in history to find that information. The locate records, on the other hand, are one of those real-time things. You have to do it at that moment that you're looking for that device, and if you do it an hour later, it's going to be different information because that device may either be off or moved or somewhere else. They're the two general categories of information that I had. The interesting thing about the locates was, at the time that they were performed in order to try and find the missing person, in this case, Holly Bobo. The information that comes back from those locates, in an ideal world would be, here's a dot on a map that says where that device is. Unfortunately, that's not possible in this case.
And why is that?
There's a number of reasons for that. The primary one is just the technology that at that time didn't support it. We are talking about 2011. The technology, in addition to that, isn't a technology that specifically supports that as well. The phone and the devices that were all used for all 4 of those numbers that we provided are actually GSM technologies, Global System for Mobile Communications. It's an older technology at this point. Even for 2011, it was a little bit older at that point, but the networks were still evolving and upgrading at that point. So that was probably the most common technology back in 2011. Specifically, though, GSM doesn't have GPS embedded in the phone. If you have a CDMA phone, like if you're on Sprint or Verizon, those phones are based on a different technology. So each one of those phones has its own GPS receiver in the phone that allows you to, see your location on a map, to actually go out, in some cases, query that device to find out where it is. That's not what we're talking about here, though, and I want to make that clear. The GSM device that Holly Bobo had the day that she disappeared didn't have any of that GPS technology associated with it. So the best thing that they could do was go to AT&T, who is the service provider, and say, can you do your best case to find out where this device is in the network? And that's what these locates are. I guess contrary to Agent Frizzell's assertion of what these locates are, I have a slightly more nuanced and more detailed approach to what these locates are, knowing how the networks actually operate.
And have you ever done locates personally?
Yes, I have.
And when I said done, what does that mean? If you,
I mean, in some cases, it's literally just typing the command into the computer that says locate this device, enter, and it'll come back and give you the information on where that device is, the specific raw data on that device.
So you're saying that, have you done locates as a service provider for other people wanting to know where a phone is?
Yes.
Okay.
I've done it. I've done it both internally for testing, verification. We'll do it on technicians that are out in the network so we can find out where technicians are, make sure the right information is coming back. But I've also done it in previous cases where they're trying to find a missing person.
So you've been actually the person that gives the locate information to someone that's requesting it?
On occasion, yes.
Okay.
So the important thing to understand here is when law enforcement or anyone goes to AT&T and says, I have a phone number, I want to know where this device is, AT&T ideally would come back with coordinates and say the phone's right here, but that's not possible in this case, as we just covered. So instead, AT&T provides the best information they have available. Now, if AT&T comes across and says, hey, we have this cell site, it's at this address, and it's got these antennas on it, and you're in the middle of trying to track down someone, that information doesn't do you any good because you don't know what that cell site is, what the antennas are, the sectors are that are on that cell site. So what happens instead is they try to take that raw information and put it into more, we'll say, generally understandable format. In this case, they're actually providing a pinpoint coordinates, and then they describe it as an uncertainty radius. So they essentially put in a dot and a circle around that dot and say, this is the area that the device could be in. But the reality is that because of how rural these sites are, the only information they really have is just what serving cell, by serving cell I mean the sector. If you recall Agent Frizzell last week, he discussed how individual cell sites are divided up into thirds, essentially. He used the clock as an example. Maybe I like my food too much. I like to use the analogy of a pizza or a pie. You cut the pizza into thirds, and each third of that pizza is where that sector serves, if you're looking down, from the sky at the cell site.
And do you have a slide that demonstrates this?
So in this case, this is the raw information that was provided to law enforcement at the time of Holly Bobo's disappearance. And they're marked as locate and the time, and the pink center point in each one of these cases is the location of the coordinates, and the yellow shaded area is the radius or the uncertainty that went along with those coordinates. When I first saw this information, I thought perhaps that this actually was based on, we'll say, some sort of network-based, location-based services. I think you guys might recall Agent Frizzell using that tagline on Saturday, location-based services. But as I looked at this, let me back up actually. Location-based services, and what he's talking about is the ability for the network to do some extra, I hate to say magic, but just some extra processing to try to find more information about where that cell or that device is at the time of that locate. Based on this information, though, it came pretty clear to me that there was no location-based services associated with this data. The thing that's most obvious is that in each one of these cases, the center points are just the center beam of that individual antenna for that sector. In addition,
what do you mean by that? 'Cause
okay, so we talked about dividing the pizza up into thirds. So in this case, the sectors are made up by individual antennas on each one of those faces that essentially serves that slice of the pizza. In this case, and may I stand, Your Honor? You may. So what I'm showing here is the actual predicted sector location for that antenna. And the actual bearing, I think you heard Agent Frizzell describe it as an azimuth. The actual main focus point of that antenna points right out at 60 degrees in this case. And when we draw a line at 60 degrees, it comes right on the center point of that locate that was returned. In addition, every single other one of them does the same thing with their respective sectors. In each case, it's within half a degree, if not right on the degree, of the azimuth of the antenna. In addition, as you look...
So you're saying it's dead in the center of that sector's antenna, the locates are?
It's at exactly the azimuth that antenna is pointed at.
Okay.
And I will get to why this is important in just a second as we cover the radius as well. If you look at the radius of each one of these circles, in each case, the radius from the center point that they provided is essentially just enough to get it back to the cell site with a little bit more to spare, so it goes around the backside of the cell site. So in this case, it's 180% of the distance, it's 104% of the distance, 105%, and 105%. That's important because those numbers aren't random. Specifically, I've been responsible for many of my customers to actually fill out the data that goes into these systems for 911 services. And you specifically enter in, for these locations, you specifically enter in all the antenna information, the azimuth of the antenna, and the serving distance. This information up here, as I see it, is strictly it's just saying this is the sector that the device is on, and this is our best approximation of where that sector serves. So let's take it back for a second. At the point where law enforcement requests to locate on the device, AT&T, someone at AT&T goes in, types in the command, locate this number, they get information back. Now, if they just came back and said, it comes back on cell 10961, which these are the labels for the individual cells in the sectors. If they say it comes back on 10961, that doesn't mean anything to anybody. I wouldn't know what 10961 is, and I'm an expert. But if they provide the location information you see up there with a dot and a circle, that's their best attempt at trying to say, hey, look, if you're trying to find somebody right now, we don't have any other information we can hand you easily, here's the best way to try to find it. My statement here is that it's certainly valid for what it is, but it's not as detailed as actually tying it back to the cells themselves. And the reason for that is that the previous slide, these are just approximations of the coverage area. This is literally the simplest way that you can try and just say, she's somewhere in this area. You know, in the example of the locate at 120 degrees on the right side, that's a huge area. And if you look at it, it actually almost reaches to the very next cell site. Realistically, if we were to instead say, we're really only looking at where she's located in these individual sectors. We can narrow that area in significantly. The important thing to note on that as well is during Agent Frizzell's presentation to everybody here, he repeatedly made the statement they were in the same general area at general times, or they were on the same tower at the same general times. The thing that's really unique about this, though, is if you look at these sectors and the way the coverage from the sectors works, there's not going to be a situation where the locate at 9:10 a.m. on cell 31522 would ever overlap with the locate on 857-10961. They're two distinctly different areas. And even in a scenario where locate 9 and locate, I'm sorry, I think they're mislabeled. It's locate, 902 and locate 910.
Can I interrupt you just
Yeah.
a second? Your little controller there has a laser pointer on it, too.
Oh, it does.
Because I'm getting lost just a little about.
Oh, like that, okay. So you can see that in this sector here, there is a very distinct difference between being in the sector in the area that this covers, than being in this sector in the area it covers. Now, there were maps that were provided by AT&T to law enforcement during this time that specifically showed their own internal predictions for where they expected these cells to cover. So now, instead of looking at the big circles, we now come back and look at the individual, what's called a predicted server map. If we look at that, we can now narrow in those areas much further.
Can I pause you just 1 second? This,
Yeah.
look, it's not even showing. Let me just bring this up to you, and I think this is Exhibit 219. When you say the overlay map, is that what you're referring to when you talk about an overlay map?
That's correct. This is the predicted best server map.
Okay, just to show that to the jury, I know they've seen that, but.
So the key here is that now, rather than looking at individual points and a large circle around it, we can now narrow in on specifically where we know these devices were at the time. And certainly the day and the morning of her abduction, to try to narrow it back to this and have a predicted server map, it's unfortunately not realistic and it's not available. But after the fact, being able to actually look at the engineering that goes into the system and know where these cells serve, we can make a much more educated estimation of where the devices were throughout these times.
So rather than have a big blob of where everybody was, you're saying you can, are you saying you can narrow it down to a specific area?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. We can use the combination of these individual sectors as well as that predicted best server map to be able to narrow in on where these devices were. So rather than saying the devices were on the same tower, they happen to be in the same general area, we can make much more precise estimations as far as where these devices are.
Okay. So doing that, what were you able to determine?
So really the only key difference here is that rather than putting in locates with the large areas on them, I've now assigned the locates to the individual sector that would have been serving the device at that time that that locate was performed. So you can see on the right side here, well, first let's discuss what this is. This is call records for Holly Bobo and Zach Adams from 8:19 a.m. to 9:50 a.m. Technically, it's from 8:17 because that's the first record on here for Holly Bobo's device. But it's 8:19 was the first activity we had that morning on Zach Adams' device. I found it a little bit odd that the statement made by Agent Frizzell last week was that there was no activity on Zach Adams' device or Jason Autry's, or I believe it was also Shane Austin's device during the abduction. As far as how I'm looking at this, I'm not looking at a time frame relative to any other event other than just saying we have activity on Holly Bobo's device, be it a call or a locate, all the way up until 8:25 a.m. So wherever there's overlap here, that's what I'm presenting. I'm just presenting where there's overlap between the devices in time.
So you're saying there were other calls that were made, text calls that were made on the devices, but you're just picking out the ones that were close in time to Holly's phone
Correct.
to show where devices were located?
Right. I'm trying to show if there's any sort of correlation between the devices, the device location, and the times.
Okay.
So you can see here at 8:17 a.m., there's a text from, well, essentially 1100 is a voicemail notification to Holly Bobo's phone. It was made on 10962. 10962, when I define that, that's the cell, and that's that sector there. The important thing about that that event was that was the first record on Holly Bobo's device that morning that was not on one of the cells that would otherwise serve her home area. Her home location is marked on here. I know Agent Frizzell covered that as well, that there were several different sectors that would cover her house, and that's because she is in a very rural, hilly area, and it's possible that different cell sites down in this area all could see her house at different times in different ways. So prior to 8:17, all of the other activity was still on sectors and cells that are down in that area between Parsons and Darden.
So this 8:17 is the first cell signal that shows her phone has moved away from her home location?
That's correct. The information that's presented here is color-coded with Holly's records in pink lettering, Zach's in black lettering, and then the backfill that you see here is for the individual sectors that it associates with. So where you see this one's in blue, this sector in blue is the one that she was on. So even if you don't want to be able to match up that number, you can just look at the colors to be able to see where each one connects. So you can see at 8:17 a.m., there's activity on Holly's phone on the, I'm going to say it's the south sector of the Natchez Trace site. But 2 minutes later, there's activity on Zach's phone on the southeast sector of the Cox Road Tower. So within 2 minutes, Holly has activity here and Zach has activity over here. They're not in areas or on sectors that are significantly overlapping. It's not like they're in areas where they're, literally two sectors that are right next to each other, pointing into each other, where you could think, hey, within 2 minutes you could be back and forth between these two sectors. Not typically. Once again, at 8:25 a.m., there's activity on Holly's phone, also on that same sector, so she's still on the same south sector of Natchez Trace. And 4 minutes later, there's activity on Zach's phone, still on that home sector. I say home sector because you can see that his house is actually located where that sector would be the one most likely to serve it. It has been consistently shown to be the sector that serves his home location. So within 2 minutes, we have very discrete locations for both devices. And then within 4 minutes, again, we have that same breakdown of different locations for those same two devices. My conclusion looking at this is that this is not conclusive, or is not expected to be that the two devices were at the same place at the same times. Certainly there is a 2 minute gap between the one and a 4 minute gap on the other. But that's not really enough time from looking at the maps to be able to transition those two sectors and move from one sector to the next. Likewise, so until 8:38, Zach remains on his southeast sector of Cox Road. At 8:53 to 8:55, he then transitions over to the southwest sector. Now you can see that this actually starts to become at least closer to Holly's device. Holly's device at 8:57 has a locate on 10961 up on this sector here, the northeast sector of Natchez Trace. So within 3 minutes, they're now on two different sectors. And now they are getting closer, but they're still not necessarily in the same exact location.
Now, let me ask you this. If Mr. Adams was at his home, let's say he walked over to his grandfather's house, you say that he's on Sector 2, that 31522, but he's not actually within that piece of pizza. He's kind of in the middle there. What does that have to do with anything?
There's a very important distinction. While we can sit here and say that that he's here and he's most likely to be on the sector, he's actually in a kind of between area. So anytime you're between these two sectors, you're in that gap, there's a possibility that you could be on one or the other, just depending on what your activity, utilization, movement looks like. So it's not impossible that he would still be at that same home location, or at least very close to home, but still have transitioned over to this other sector. So to follow through with the rest of the locates on here, you can see at 8:58, Zach's device, at 8:58 and 8:59, Zach's device transfers back over to that southeast sector of Cox Road. And at that same time, or sorry, 2 minutes after that, there's a locate done on Holly's device that then moves it into that southwest sector of Cox Road. At 9:06, there's another activity. There's actually a voice call on Holly's device that was unanswered, still on the same sector. So the 901.
And let me ask you, see right there on that Holly's device at 9:06, that 901-552-9905, is that a voicemail call? That phone number, does that represent a call going to voicemail?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, none of these calls were answered by Holly's device throughout this period.
I'm just specifically asking you about that phone number, that 901 number. That's indicative of the voice call.
Going to voicemail.
Okay, voicemail number. Got it.
So at 9:10 a.m., now granted, Zach has been back on the from 8:58 and 8:59. He's back on his home sector. At 9:01 and 9:06, Holly's device is still on this other sector to the southwest. And then at 9:10, there's activity on Zach's phone and on Holly's phone in that same sector. And there's also activity again at 9:12 on Zach's phone. So at 9:10, there is an overlap on these sectors, a one-for-one overlap, that they're both using the same sector at the same time. And then to complete the loop, I'm going to come back to this in a second. To complete the loop, at 9:25 a.m., the final locate that was performed and successful on Holly's phone placed it down off this northwest sector of Parsons. As I review this information and I look at the data for that morning on Holly's device, the general trend is that it starts down and around a residence. She travels up for an extended period of time in the south sector of the Natchez Trace site. She then transitions fairly rapidly, well, I say fairly rapidly, from 8:26 to 8:57, there's no data on Holly's device to know where she is or what she's doing, or where the device is, I'm sorry. So there is a significant gap in there, almost of a half hour, or more than a half hour. But when she registers on this site for that locate, it fairly rapidly, from 8:57 to 9:01, 9:06, 9:10, proceeds to move in this direction. And then ultimately coming back down in order to be on this northwest sector of Parsons. So the general trend is that the device spent some time down in this area or even up between these two sectors, but then ultimately completed a loop back down this direction. By contrast, Zach Adams' device stayed either on his home sector or for a brief period was back onto the southwest sector and then returned back to his home sector.
Okay, and then the final one, you do have a final one down there at the bottom that's in purple.
Yes, I included this, it doesn't show up real well for everybody on here, but I included this last record for Zach at 9:50 a.m. because it places him far, well outside of this area and to the northeast of the Birdsong Tower. And there's going to be some slides that we'll use to cover that period of time as well. I just wanted to show you that there was, this is the nearest record to 925 is that 950 record for Zach.
And that birdsong tower, is it over there by the Tennessee River?
It is.
Okay.
Excuse me, what page is this? I'm just trying to keep track of your report.
This particular one,
The one,
yeah,
on the screen.
I'm sorry, they're not numbered.
Seven? Mr. Reeves, is this page 7? That, where you have that chart, you're gonna count?
Yes, it's page 7.
Can I just make a notation of 7 at the bottom of your report here?
Certainly. The next pages in my report essentially just summarize what I just went through here as far as the individual call records, the time frames, where there was activity, who it was by, and it's all color coded in here with Holly Bobo's records in pink and Zach Adams' records in blue. And then ultimately the conclusion that I just gave you regarding the transitioning of the phone and the movement of the phone is presented as well. So in this slide, I essentially cover that same time frame, but I cover it for Jason Autry. And to be clear, I don't include everybody's records all in one page because, frankly, there's too many and it would get too jumbled. So if I tried to include Holly Bobo's, Zach Adams, and Jason Autry's all in one slide, there would be too much information, too many records to actually fit onto the slide to be able to be seen. So there's a couple slides later on that you'll see where it gets a little bit small, hard to read, and that's why I had to split them out into separate slides.
And now we're on page 10 of your report, is that so?
Correct.
Okay. I'll put a 10 on the exhibit if that's okay with you.
Yes. So in this map, it's the same exact map, same locations, same color codes. The only difference here is that we're now looking at Holly Bobo's phone and Jason Autry's phone. We can see the same exact records that we just discussed for Holly Bobo, and now we're looking at Jason Autry's records instead of Zach's. We can see that this 819 call looks very similar to Zach's because that was actually a call from Jason Autry to Zach Adams, so they both had calls at 819. We can see that the Jason Autry calls, all these in the lighter shade of yellow or cream, are actually for this sector up here. I know it's not a real good contrast, but all of these records
Can
were
you
on-
say out loud for the record what sector you're pointing to with your pointer?
Well, yeah, I was going to say the sector that I'm pointing at is the cell 31521, and it's the north sector of the Cox Road Tower. So during this time frame when Holly Bobo's device is down on the south sector of Natchez Trace, Jason Autry is on the north sector of Cox Road in very discrete and different location than anything that would be served down here. He remains in that general area until 8:40 a.m. And then at 8:52, he transitions into the southeast sector of Cox Road Tower, 31522. Up till 8:55, he remains on that sector, so still in that southeast area. We have these same activity on Holly Bobo's device from 8:57 to 9:25 a.m. with no activity on Jason Autry's device during that same time frame. Lastly, and it's cut off on there, but lastly, I included the record at 9:42 a.m. where Jason Autry's device transitioned to the northeast sector of Birdsong.
Let me see, is there any way to lift it up? That's the last call there that you
Yeah,
can see.
and we will cover that in a separate slide for that time frame.
Okay.
I just wanted to include his next record just so you could see the gap in the time when there was activity. So the next page of my report covers essentially exactly what I just discussed, the individual call records, what the activity was, and it does go into a little bit more detail further down the time frame to 11:40 a.m., but there will be a separate slide that I'll discuss that activity in more detail. So my conclusion on Holly Bobo's device doesn't change from this. Her activity and her records are still the same. So what I discussed before about the movement of the device in a generally clockwise manner remains the same. The only thing that's new on this conclusion is just that Jason Autry's device, during the time frames and the records that were available, don't place him in any of those locations at exactly the same times or locations. There's certainly there are records, where he's at 8:55, he's on that southeast sector, but Holly Bobo's device does not reach that sector until 9:10 a.m.
Now, on that same slide number 10, page 10, at any point does Jason, well, where would you expect Shane Austin's home tower to be?
So it's labeled on here as the Austin residence. And the sector that we've consistently seen that serves him and is predicted to serve him is that southwest sector of Cox Road Tower.
And can you give us a number for the record? Because she's writing things down.
Cell 31523.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, 31523. And we'll actually get to Shane Austin's record in the next
Okay,
several
at
slides.
any point, though, from these records on page 10, does it appear that Jason Autry is on Shane Austin's home tower?
There are no records or activity that indicates Jason Austin used that 31523 sector.
Can you go to what you just looked through right there? What page is that?
12?
So 12, would that be page
This-
12 if
this
it's
is
2
12.
pages down from
Yeah.
10?
And then this would be page 13.
Is it okay if I just go through and number the pages in your report?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So this map and the information on it depicts essentially the same information that we've been covering, but in this case it's for Holly Bobo's records as well as for Shane Austin's phone records for that morning. In Agent Frizzell's report, he didn't include any of the information for Shane Austin. He just said that there was no activity on his phone during that time frame. And while that's correct, I thought it was important that we at least present what activity there was as it relates to Holly Bobo's device and her time frame. So specifically, Shane Austin's first activity is at 9:23 a.m. So there is some overlap, meaning it does slot between these two locates that we've discussed before on Holly Bobo's device at 9:10 and 9:25. But Shane Austin's activity at 9:23 a.m. is on cell 31523, which is the cell that we discussed previously, is expecting to serve his home location. You can see then from 9:45 on, he continues to have pretty consistent activity all the way up to 10:55 a.m., all the while on cell 31523, that home sector. It isn't until 11:01 a.m. that he actually leaves that cell and transitions onto the southeast sector, 31522. You can also see, based on these two locates, that there is a 9:23 a.m. Activity on Shane Austin's device, and there's a 9:25 a.m. locate on Holly Bobo's device on two discretely different sectors. But there could be some, because they do point into each other, there could be some potential overlap or some areas where they would be adjacent to each other, where you hand off from one sector to the next. And in this slide, I'm just discussing, the details of what we just looked at on the map for the individual call records. There's very little that we can actually determine from these call records because there are so few of them in the overlapping time frame. The closest one is the 923 to 925. So I can't come to any definitive conclusion or make any predictions on exactly what was happening with regard to Shane Austin's device during the time where there was no activity. So as we discussed previously, I was going to also cover the time frame where Zach Adams and Jason Autry's devices left the holiday area and traveled to Birdsong. The information in here, it's still color-coded to the individual sector. So where you see it in purple, that's that purple sector at 39077 for cell 39077. Where it's in brown, that's that northwest sector 39079. This particular sector, it's color-coded, but it's never actually used in any of the records. So if they were transitioning through this area, it never actually has any activity on that sector during that transitioning. And then you can see these sectors are still color-coded the same. So you can see, to start from the top, at 9:12 a.m., there's activity on Zach Adams' device on his home sector. There's a gap till 9:42 a.m., where both, 9:42, Jason Autry has activity on that northeast sector of Birdsong, 39077. At 9:50 a.m., Zach Adams also has activity on 39077. There's a considerable number of calls by Zach Adams during this time frame, all the way up to 10:30 a.m., 10:32 a.m., at which point they both start transitioning back into this northwest sector, back into the southeast sector, at which point we don't have any more records for Jason Autry for some time, but Zach Adams does return to the southwest sector of Cox Road.
Okay. Now let me ask you about this transition. If you look at the last purple row up there, that's a Zach Adams call. It's a text, actually, and it's a text out from his phone. Is that right?
That's correct.
At 10:32?
Yeah, at 10:32 a.m., there's a text from Zach Adams' phone to 731-733-1346.
Okay. Perhaps the girlfriend's telephone number. Did you analyze Rebecca Earp's telephone records?
I did. I don't have it memorized off the top of my head.
Okay. So based on this call, he's at the Birdsong 7 tower. Is that right?
He's on the northeast sector of Birdsong. And this is, there may be some questions on this, so I do want to cover this. As we've discussed in the past, we've always discussed it being 3 slices of pizza, evenly distributed at 120 degrees each. But when you get into the real world and the engineering, sometimes that doesn't actually work that way. So what you can see here is that these 2 sectors don't actually make up perfect slices of pie. They're actually a little bit more off of their azimuth. That's why you see a larger gap up here. So the actual engineering information that we were provided shows that these sectors were a little bit more east and west to shoot up and down, east and west down the interstate for that particular site. It's not that it's anything critical, but it is a difference from what's kind of standard and what we've been discussing to this point.
And if somebody were over, okay, I'm sorry, scratch that question. So then his next call from the, and I'm calling it Birdsong, but you're calling it 39077 tower.
Correct. This is the northeast sector of the Birdsong Tower.
And that's at 10:32. At 10:35, he has a voice call, and that is on the 39079 sector.
That's correct. That's the west.
So it's directly west of where he was before.
That's correct.
Okay. And then he has another call at 10:35, another voice call. Does that look right?
Yes.
Okay. And then he has another call at 10:36. Does that look right?
Yes.
Okay. And then he has another call at 10:36. Oh, well, there's a text there and then a call.
Yes, there's a text message at 10:36, and then there's a phone call.
Okay. And then at 10:37, he has a text message.
Correct.
And all of those are in that that 39079 sector.
That's correct.
And that goes from 10:35 to 10:37.
Correct.
So that's a 3-minute, 2-minute gap there.
Correct.
Okay. And then the very next thing, he is at 10:38, he has a text call, and he's back in Cox 2.
Yeah, he's on the southeast sector of Cox Road, and it's 31522.
And we're calling these Cox 2 because the tower is actually located on Cox Road.
Yes, there's many different names that even AT&T uses for these individual sites, and
But when I said that, what I meant was it's 31522.
that's the correct cell number, yes.
Okay. And if you just indicate where that is for the jury.
That's the record, and that's the location.
Okay. So that is 1 minute later at 10:38.
That's correct, and there certainly could be some questions over that, but as you transition from this sector, as you drive west from Birdsong towards Cox Road, whether you do it on the highway or you do it on one of the back roads, at some point there's going to be a transition where you go from one sector to the next. And this one seems pretty clear that they transition from the one sector on the northwest sector of Birdsong to the southeast sector of Cox Road at right about that point. And it doesn't bounce back after that.
And he's made that trip in a total of 5 minutes, from 10:32 until 10:38. 6 minutes.
Yes, that's the difference in time.
And he does not, during that time, hit off of 39078, which would be Birdsong South Tower.
That's correct. There were no records that utilized 39078, that south sector on Birdsong during that time.
And I'd like to show you a map, if I could. Okay, are we going to be able to switch back and forth? How do we switch these things?
Yeah, if you unplug the cable from my laptop, it should.
I think it's possible now. I'll never get it back working.
My laptop will never work again. There's 2 ports on the back. It's got to go on the one towards the back of
Display
it.
out, not computer in. That's helpful.
There you go.
I'd like to show you a map here. You can see this map. So, on this, what? This is exhibit number for the record. Um, 237. So if somebody were at the Tennessee River, starting up here, and this is I-40, can you see that it says I-40 there? I can make it zoom
Yes,
in more.
I can see it. Well, I could.
Okay. You see now that it says I-40 up there? Yes, okay. So if you were over here at the Tennessee River and you traveled straight down till you get to this part of the water that kind of jerks out there around Nick's Landing, and then you were to cut over, would you expect to show up in that Birdsong 8, that lower quadrant cellular tower, if you were on the phone at that time?
If there was activity during that time where they transitioned that area, I would expect to see it on that south sector of Birdsong, or the 39078 cell. Yes.
Okay, and do you ever see any activity this morning on that Birdsong 8 sector?
No, there was no records of activity on that 39078 sector.
Okay, so now we're back to your report.
And before I move on from this particular page, are there any other questions on this page?
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
So now we're to page 17.
So once again, I'm just recapping the discussion that we just had as far as the time frame, the sectors that were used during those times, and the conclusion. It does appear that both devices traveled at that same time through those same areas because there were records that tied them up in very close in time as well as on the same sectors. So it would certainly be within the realm of reason that those two devices were together as they made that trip, at least until the point where they returned, back onto the southeast sector of Cox Road, at which point there are no records from Jason Autry, but Zach Adams does continue on to the southwest sector.
Okay.
And this is the last map and the last analysis that I have, and specifically the time frame that we're looking at here is after Zach Adams' device returns from birdsong. So if you look at that previous slide, the last record was 10:49 a.m. And if you look at this next slide, it's 10:49 a.m. on the top line. So this map covers a time frame from when Zach Adams' device returns back to the Cox Road site, and the activity of Zach Adams' device and Shane Austin's device for essentially the next approximately hour and a half. And during that time frame, you can see Zach Adams and Shane Austin are both on that southwest sector of Cox Road, 31523, until 10:55 a.m.
So that would be Shane's home sector.
Correct. That would be the sector that we expect to serve, and we've been noted to serve Shane Austin's home.
Okay. So they're there what looks like about 6, maybe 10 minutes.
So, yeah, somewhere between 6 and 10 minutes.
Okay.
Because at 11:01 a.m., Shane Austin's device transitions to the southeast sector of Cox Road, 31522.
Okay, and that would be back by the interstate, anywhere from,
Yeah, it could be anywhere down in this
right.
area.
Okay.
And then from there, and the colors don't match up real well, but you can see the color code here. This is red to match up with the red sector, the south sector in Parsons. This pink doesn't match up real well with the pink that shows through there, but this 12571 record would match up with 12571 cell. And then all the rest of these records from 11:15 a.m. to 12:10 p.m. are all on that south sector of Parsons. At 12:18, that's the first record we have on 12571, that northeast sector of Parsons, most likely as they start to travel back to the north. And then at 12:35, they're back up on the home sector for Shane Austin.
Okay.
The key takeaway is that both of these devices were active during that time frame. They both traveled the same general direction, were active on the same sites. So it may certainly be reasonable to conclude that they were together during that time frame in those locations.
Okay, so reasonable to conclude that Shane Austin and Zach Adams' telephones were together since they seem to be making transitions together. Is that right?
Correct, based on the activity on the same cells within the same time frame.
Okay.
Very similar to the analysis that we had just gone through for the birdsong sectors as well.
Okay. Okay. Did you also do some analysis regarding activity on the birdsong cell tower and different dates?
Yes, I have specifically looked up activity and made some notes of how often both Zach Adams, Jason Autry, Dylan Adams, and to, I believe, a lesser extent, I think I said Shane Austin already. Zach Adams, Jason Autry, Dylan Adams, and to a lesser extent, Shane Austin, Their devices were over on that same northeast sector of Birdsong. So
Okay,
specifically this sector here.
Let me see if I can have a minute, Your Honor, let me see if I can find that. You did a spreadsheet, is that right?
I did. I don't know if it was printed out or
Okay. let me
presented
s-
in that form.
If I can have a minute to find it. Your Honor, there's a spreadsheet I'm looking for, and in all of these papers, I can't find it right now.
I think he said he wasn't sure it was published.
No.
I know I had prepared it and emailed it. I don't know if I ever printed it.
Okay.
Okay, I think I need to print it. It's close to lunchtime. Would it be possible for us to take our lunch break now?
We can do that. Usually they bring their food in about this time, so we'll go ahead and take our lunch recess. You folks take about an hour. We'll call for you. So, call the admin issues. I gotta get the outset.